Hey guys, it's Unmaxter again, and this is my in-depth guide on KK. This guide is preferably for MC Festers, but maybe we'll make another separate guide that covers more of the higher tiers and more of the non-MC Festers guide. But this is mainly to help out MC Fest that struggles with killing KK. First of all, I gotta go through the ability bars and gear setup, because without the abilities and without the gear setup, you probably wouldn't be able to kill Kalphite King. So, first of all, there are three different classes you can use, or 4 different classes you can be when you kill KK. One of them is the Voker, and that's one of the most important ones. And tanker that tanks the KK preferably needs tanking gear and good HP bonus gear, and the DPS that does the most damage. And yeah, so let's move on to the gear. First of all, I'm gonna cover up my setup. This is the Voking setup that I use. I am a DPS Voke. That means you use Devotion and you have a spare shield with you. My gear is kinda OP because I got Dragos. But you don't necessarily need those. You can use Alpha and Chaotix, Alpha and main hand Chaotix, or even a Chaotic Mole. I got Bandos with Berserker Ring, Pendant Aura, and Sign of Item Protect, so I can protect more items. Fury, you can exchange that with a Glory. Get Thermic Boots and Gloves, you can exchange that with Barrow's Gloves and with what's it called, with War Priest Boots or Dragon Boots. Yeah, so this is basically my melee setup, and if I don't have Penance Aura active, I will use Vampirism. You can also switch Sign of Item Protection with a Scrimshaw, preferably Vampirism Scrimshaw. I'll show some more setups afterwards. You can also switch out DPS gear, the Bandos, with Thorax, Darax, Ferak, and Barrow's gear that relates to melee. Yep. So this was my setup, and now let's move on to the other setup, which is the DPS setup. Here we go. Here's the DPS setup. This is thanks to Knight MCFS that showed me his, because he has a bit more like DPS gear than me when it comes to magic. You can also use melee and use the same setup as I did with without the shield to use the DPS, to be the DPSer. But this is the mage setup with the DPS. As you can see, his Hood of Subjugation. He's got a runic staff, which is basically one of the requirements in MCFS to get, or have a chaotic staff. And he got arms top and bottom, and boots and gloves. You can also replace those with Thermic boots. And he got a B ring, and yeah, yeah, that's that one. Right, you can use arms, or you can use bad ring, but I wouldn't recommend it because you're gonna get hit way too often for the MCFS. And you can also replace the Tokar Call with a magic cape or a skill cape. Yeah. And now onto, you can also, if you don't have the gear, any of the gear, but you have War Priest, use that, because then you can bring a switch with Royal Crossbow or any good crossbow you have, and you can use that to use the Mage Phase, which is really good. And Mage Phase and minions, which DPS needs to use. Yeah. So let's move on to the tanking setup, and thanks to Chef of MCFS to help me out with this one. Here we go again. Here is the chef setups. As you can see, it's kind of like mine, but only that he has a yak and extremes instead of overloads. He got a warrior's ring. He got, as you can see here, is Kering Mole, and he got full superior Tetsu, which is the best equipment you can use for tanking, at least for MCFS. And this is like the best setup you can use, but keep in mind that he has worked for it for a long time. So if you're new starting into MCFS and want to join the KK, you don't necessarily have to use this. It can keep up with, you can tank with a War Priest or with a Carols, but preferably you wouldn't do that, because then you probably will be the DPSer. Yeah. So as that was said, I will move on to the inventory setup. That's also a very important thing you have to keep in mind when you do KK. Yep. As you can see here, this is my setup, which is pretty good in my opinion. I preferably will use a adrenaline flask, and I use 4 super restores and rocktails. This is my equipment. You can also switch out the rocktails with the sharks, but then it won't last longer, but it will get you there. I wouldn't use less than sharks to do this, because this is a must, because you can't use, for instance, tuna or swordfish. Okay, so you can also switch out with a bunyip or with a pig. I don't have any pigs now, but you can use a pack pig. Don't use the war tortoise, because you don't want to use attacking familiars, because that can mess up the stun abilities, or not the stun abilities, but the green phase. So I wouldn't use that one, but you should use the at least a summoning familiar that doesn't attack. So either a yak, a bunyip, or a unicorn, or a pig. That holds, by the way, 22 spaces, so it's really good. But it's a waste of food if you die. Yeah. So this was the inventory setup. Sorry if I covered this too fast. I will. You have to write it down in the comments, because this is my first video, my first guide. But it will come more to the future. Now to ability bar setup. So this is what I usually use when I do abilities for the first screen, because then I got devotion active. I got 50% adrenaline, which makes you can use the devotion ability. So use all the basic attacks. Don't use provoke until the guy got green, but I will show that later when we do a successful kill. Then you can use assault right after you're done. You can use it before, but right after you're done devotion, use assault, because that's the safest. Then it won't green mid assault. Don't use destroy, because that stuns. I'll cover that later, what happens if it stuns. You can use flurry if your minions are nearby. And sacrifice is also a good ability to have, because that heals you. And surge is a must to get away from the blue balls and the balls in mage phase and minions, because that hits you a lot. So now moving on to the when you don't have devotion active. This is my devoking evoking ability bar setup. That was before devotion was out. Got basic abilities in the 1, 4 and Q slot. You might have a different adrenaline setup or setup how you set up this, but this is preferably for me. So I got Vogue and Resonance at 2 and 3. Then I got Devotion at E, just in case. Then I got Barricade and Immortality. I always use Barricade unless I got really low HP, then it will heal you, and if minions are out, you wouldn't use Resonance, because that can destroy it. Now moving on to the mage setup. What you don't want to use is these these three: the asphyxiate, the impact, and the combust. You want to use them. Replace them with devotion, and devotionance, and another ability you can decide would, for example, escape. Because it wouldn't, if you use those, it can stun and it will heal. But I will cover that later. Here's the range one. I wouldn't use range unless it's mage phase, unless you have ascension things. Then in mage phase, as long as it doesn't go green bubble, you can use bleeds. For example, fragment shot, combust, or dismember. No, I wouldn't use the threshold. The threshold slaughter. I wouldn't use that. And you can use pretty much all of these abilities. I wouldn't recommend using stun. No, don't use stun. But on mage phase, you can use pretty much every ability, and range, trust me, it hits hard. Yeah. So this was my first part of my KK. No, this was the first part. Yeah, the first part of the KK guide. So I will see you in. It will only be a couple of seconds for you guys, but I will see you in the next part, where I cover up the requirements.